I had been researching and immersing myself in the stories of the greatest power figures who ever lived. And I had begun to notice certain patterns and a common trait that they all shared. After years of practice and experience and study in their field, the minds of these various figures, they had reached a superior level of intelligence. They could discover things about the world that were simply invisible to everyone else. They had a sixth sense for trends and opportunities. They could make the most surprising and creative connections between ideas. And I decided I would call these people masters. They had essentially mastered their field. And in order to sort of explain this phenomenon of mastery to myself in the early days of thinking about it, I came up with the following metaphor. I'm going to share that metaphor with you. And basically it goes like this. When you first enter your career or the field that you're going to be pursuing, it is as if you were looking up at a mountain. And the top of that mountain represents the knowledge and experience you need in order to be successful or to achieve something in your field. When you first begin or look up, it seems rather far away and quite intimidating. But you begin to learn the rules and the practices and develop the skills that are necessary for your field, and you make your way up this mountain. Your progress might be slow, but as you get higher, you have this sort of better perspective of what your field represents. You have a firmer grasp on reality. But what often happens to people at some point in their career is that the more they know about their field, the more complicated it becomes. All of a sudden, new unforeseen problems arise. They have to keep up with all kinds of new trends and changes in their field. There's more and more and more information to absorb the further you rise up. And often you have the feeling of being completely overwhelmed by this glut of information and the complexity of your field, to the point where you don't really even feel like you're getting this better perspective. Well, masters are people who, because of their intense connection to what they're studying, because of their love for it, they actually learn faster, they learn more intensely than other people, and they generate this kind of momentum where they push past all of those obstacles and they reach the top of this mountain. It could take 10, it could take 20 years. But at the top of that mountain, they have perfect perspective. They can see in all directions. They have a real solid grasp on their field. They can make connections between an idea over here and an idea over there that you can't see when you're partway down the mountain because you don't have that kind of perspective. This command of their field is immensely satisfying and is even godlike. And I am saying that this is the highest form of intelligence we humans can achieve. Whether it's Napoleon Bonaparte, Leonardo Da Vinci, Steve Jobs, it doesn't matter. All of my books have kind of iconic figures, like for power it was Machiavelli, for war it was Napoleon. The icon of this book, and to me the greatest master who ever lived, is Leonardo da Vinci. And the thing about Leonardo da Vinci is he's sort of associated with this almost superhuman power. I mean, how else can you explain his achievements except for the fact that he was gifted with some kind of freakish talent? Well, in my research and going deeply into him, I found that actually it's not the case at all. He's an extremely human person. His power is very explicable. And not only that, I believe the story of Leonardo da Vinci is insanely relevant to the future that we're all facing. Da Vinci was born as the illegitimate son of this Florentine, a notary who worked in Florence. And as an illegitimate son, he was not allowed to attend university or pursue any of the noble professions such as medicine or law. So he was basically this wild, unschooled child who grew up in the town of Vinci. And as this child who was on his own, his favorite thing to do was to wander through the countryside. And one day, when he was maybe 8 or 9 years old, he snuck into his father's office and he stole some paper. And he took this paper and he went into this wild part of the forest that he was so attracted to, and he started to draw what he saw. He started to draw flowers and animals and streams and the rocks and everything. So he starts to do this a lot. And he doesn't have any teachers, he just draws what he sees and he gets better and better at it. He gets so good that his father sees his drawings and he's completely impressed. And he gets Leonardo a position as an apprentice in one of the most important studios in Florence with the artist Verrocchio. And as it turns out, he is by far the most diligent student in that studio. He takes practice to another extreme. He had an obsessive personality. As he goes further into this apprenticeship, he starts to initiate his own exercises and experiments. He starts walking through the streets of Florence and drawing the people as they're walking by, and he goes into churches and into brothels and into prisons and drawing people's faces. And finally, he starts to even experiment in the paintings that he's supposed to do for Verrocchio. After he leaves Verrocchio's studio, Leonardo continues to be this weirdo. The path for an artist normally was quite a servile one. You were basically a hired hand. Some aristocrat would commission you to do a portrait of the mistress or the queen or whomever, and you were sort of at their mercy. So he devised a completely novel career path. He decided to immerse himself in the study of engineering, civil and military engineering, in hydraulics, in all sorts of sciences and architecture, in painting as well, and sculpture. And basically, if you wanted Leonardo to work for you, you had to hire him as someone who was a part of your court. And later on, he actually got this position with the Duke of Milan and the King of France. And the thing about it is that it's not this comes from the superhuman genius at all. All of that power came from a person who simply worked harder, who was so obsessed with detail that he put in hours that nobody else would think of. And in fact, Leonardo's motto for his life was ostinato rigore, which means relentless rigor. This man had relentless rigor. When he attacked a problem, that was it, and he would spend all of his hours of his life doing that. Now, I think that he, for me, represents the fundamental lesson of mastery and everything else that I wrote about. And the idea goes as follows. Every human being is born unique. Each one of you was born with a DNA and a configuration of your brain that has never happened before in history and will never happen in the future. This uniqueness that you have is manifested in your early years when you're a child by the fact that you're drawn towards certain activities. It could be physical activity like a dance or sports. It could be something more intellectual like math, or it could be music. Whatever it is, it's a sign that you are drawn to this thing in a way that's pre-verbal, you can't even explain. And that is the manifestation of your uniqueness. And I compare this uniqueness that each one of you has to a voice that's inside of your head. It's telling you, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. It's what fits you, it's what you're good at. Well, masters, like Leonardo, are people who hear that voice and they hear it so strongly that they stay true to it throughout the course of their life. You could draw a line from that 8-year-old boy to the 64-year-old man who's on his deathbed. What happens when you know your life's task and you pursue it? In those early years of entering your field, you are so deeply engaged in it, you're so curious for its own sake that you pay greater attention, you learn faster, you enter what I call the cycle of accelerated returns. When you're excited and you learn something, now the practice becomes more pleasurable and you practice harder. And as you practice harder, it gets more pleasurable, and you practice harder and harder and harder until it's like generating a motor, and you have a very intense apprenticeship. And by the end of your career, or 10 or 20 or 30 years down the line, what you're able to do is so unique, it is such a reflection of your individuality, that you have realized that seed that was planted at your birth. Now, I think the greatest danger that all of you face in your careers, and particularly in this weird world that we're all entering, or that you're entering, I've been in it for a while, is that you're basically going to be replaceable. That's the fate that most people have. You learn a trade, you learn it well, and you reach a point where somebody younger and cheaper can do what you can do, and you better believe that somebody younger and cheaper will take your place. So the game of life, if it is a game, the end game is to be irreplaceable. You're one of a kind. You're original. There's nobody who can replace you, just as there's nobody who can replace Leonardo Da Vinci. There's no one else like Napoleon Bonaparte. There's no one else like Steve Jobs. And I generally say that if they're masters, there's nobody else that can take their place. And that is the ultimate position of power in this world. And that's what everybody in here should eventually aim at.